Hi everyone, welcome back to the Beyond Bold podcast. It is your host Kyla Bolden here. Thank you so much for joining me again this week. Today we have a really special guest on the podcast. We have Andrea, who is the founder of Ritelio. So Ritelio is a really cool AI company. Basically what they do is they scan your call data and help you be able to better identify what customers actually care about, what they want, the problems that they're trying to solve. So I'm going to let Andrea really describe what the company is all about, but I'm excited to have her on the podcast because I really wanted to have more people who are a part of the AI world on Beyond Bold, because I know how much AI is changing my life and our company's life. And I really want to make sure that you guys have a clear understanding of the AI industry. So we are going to definitely have more guests that are in the AI space. I'm going to be doing solo episodes on AI, what we're building at Wiz Learning, how really AI is going to change like the world as we know it. Not to scare you guys, but I mean it in the most positive way, but also keeping in mind that it's important for us to stay on top of all of the changes so that we do not get left behind. So without further ado, let's hop into the episode with Andrea. She's going to tell you all about her company. She also was an angel investor before starting her company, so she has a lot of incredible tips for individuals who are looking for angel funding. And this is not the first company she built either. So without further ado, let's hop into the episode. Hi, Andrea. Thank you so much for joining me today on Beyond Bold. For everyone listening, Andrea is the COO of Ritelio, which is an AI briefing tool. I'm going to let her explain it in total, but it's a really incredible tool. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do when it came to this podcast is make sure I get women who are in the AI space, because I know that is something that's on the top of everyone's mind. So, Andrea, before we jump into your company, I want to talk a little bit about AI because I think that's on the tip of everyone's tongue, especially now. It might have been, you know, a constant in our life for a few years now, but it's really, really becoming mainstream with the commercialization of it. Did you recently get into the AI space with this company, or were you privy to it before starting Ritelio?
That's a great question. So, happy to be here first. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So when I was at Verifin Nasdaq, before starting Ritelio, one of the things that I think probably all companies are thinking about is like, how do they start to use AI? And, it's usually Copilot or ChatGPT, like kind of those intro level tools that pretty much everybody's using now. So we started using that at the company, and then just personally, like using it even for different LinkedIn posts, just dabbling. But my co-founder, he actually led the AI product team at Verifin Nasdaq, so he was very involved in AI. So a little bit, I think it really just took off though in the last year. That the new LLMs and all the new tools and different ways to use it. So it's still pretty new.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned that you worked at another company before, and I think that's how you met your co-founder. I want to go into the co-founder story because I think that's very interesting. I'm a solo founder, so I always love hearing about how co-founders meet and how it works and all of that. But tell me a little bit about what your company does, just so that we can make sure everyone has a good understanding of that. And then I want to go into your co-founder story a bit.
Yeah, sure. So it's kind of like a combination of extreme listening and data aggregation is kind of the super high level. Um, Really, it came from the company that we used to work at, where they listened to a lot of customer calls and prospect calls. And all companies that are recording customer calls these days, like they've got all of this data and all of these customers telling them what they want, what they don't want, what price is too much, objections, like all the stuff that you want to know about your customers. It's all in those call recordings, but nobody can actually get that out and hear what's happening in a big kind of broad sweeping sense. And so that is the tool that we built. It is literally a super listening way of hearing what your customers are saying on those calls. And we went through all kinds of pivots, like all startups. There was different versions and different ways we were going to solve the problem. But what we ended up hearing as we talked to different prospects was that people like being able to hear the voice of the customer, and they don't want to lose that tone and like the actual things and the words that customers are saying. So we take the important parts from those calls and then turn them into podcasts.
Oh, that is really cool because that is a big problem. I even find myself when after you get off a call and you have your notes, and then you're like, okay, I actually really want to make sure that I have everything down and I pick out the key moments, all of that. And you say you turn it into a podcast. Is it the customer speaking on that recording, or is it like, I'm thinking of something like 11 Labs where it's a podcast about the call? Like how does that work?
That's a good question. It is actually the customer speaking because there's a lot of tools out there where, yeah, as you said, you can just have a summarization and an AI reading it. But we think it's really important to have the voice of the customer because it's pretty easy to get a summary, but I usually want to hear how they said it, what they sounded like. And then, in certain cases, like if you're listening for maybe what problem, like we do a lot of calls with prospects, and I'm listening for what are the problems that they're trying to solve with Retailio. And so I actually have it set up so that when I say, what are the problems you're trying to solve with Retailio? I have it set up so that I hear every single answer to that question across calls. And so I can just play the podcast and listen to 20 different calls of how people are explaining the problems that they want solved. And then you just get this instant, like you can kind of create epiphanies because you're like, oh, yes, okay, five people just said the same thing in different terms, but really they're all trying to solve the same problem. And that just helps you build your product better.
You know what? I'm thinking it's not even just helpful when it comes to that specific prospect, but you're saying it kind of could like aggregate the data so that you could, focus on, okay, what was everyone's responses after I gave the demo, or what was the questions that came up, or when I asked what is your budget, what did everyone say, and or when I told them the pricing, what was the response to that. And so that's really really cool, and I know that is something that's definitely going to be really helpful to a lot of founders. Now I want to go back to you actually starting the company. How did that come about? Because you and your co-founder, you said you met at the company that you were working with. What was that step to be like, okay, I like, we're going to take a step and not work here anymore and actually start our own company? Bring me through that journey.
Yeah, it was fun. So Brent and I actually started at Verafin in the same week, and we left in the same week, 5 weeks, 5 years later. And so I started out in customer success team. So like I ran the training team and project management and some different teams across. And Brent was involved more on the management side. And then he and I had about 2 years when we were on the new markets team together. We went again to different teams. I went to communications and marketing, and he went to the AI product team. And it was great, but we were both kind of like, it was so exciting on that new market team, looking for like big picture, what's next, and coming up with new ideas. And so we would check in with each other every month or so and say like, how's it going? Are you happy? And it just kind of started to percolate that way. And then at the Christmas party, after a few drinks, we were like, we need to do it. Let's start our own company. Let's do it. Um, and so that was last December. And what we would do is just every month we would meet for lunch and we would just kind of go like, okay, what could we do? What could we build? And it wasn't until June last year we kind of had this aha moment of like, this is the problem we want to solve. And we quickly raised money and left. Raising
So
money was an important part because we both have families, so we couldn't just, bootstrap it. And
yeah, absolutely. And I would say that like, raising capital is something that every founder, goes through. Am I going to do it? Uh, when is the right time? Can I actually do it? And, you kind of just said like we raised money really quickly and got started, right? And that is really not the reality for most founders. So I would love to hear a little bit more about how like your capital raising journey went, and was it like you raised was it actually like you raised money and then got started, or did you get started before that? Like how did that happen?
That's a great question. And very lucky because it is not a normal fundraising journey at all. I think especially for, you know, people with a pretty, like we didn't have a product, we just had an idea. Um, we had done, I think at least like 30 or 40 calls to validate that it was a decent idea, like that it was actually going to solve a problem that people would pay for. And I was fortunate. I used to do angel investing in Atlantic Canada. And so, kind of know a lot of the local investors in this
Hmm.
space. And I was also a mentor at the Creative Deconstruction Lab. So same thing. So, like, had a lot of connections with local VCs and angels. So, that's like, that gets you over the biggest hurdle. So, having those relationships established early on is great. And the first pitch. I don't even want to call it a pitch. It was a friend who we said, look, this is our idea. This is what we've done to date. This is where we think it could go. And she instantly said, like, we're in and we'll lead it. So, yeah, not the normal story whatsoever. But then we did, our raise took probably 2 months and it was over the summer, which I do not suggest doing. Trying to raise money in the summer is awful because everybody's on vacation. But yeah, we ended with $1.3 million. So that
Hmm.
was huge. But we left our jobs right after that conversation with the first investor because
Okay.
we didn't want to be in two places at once. That wouldn't be fair.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, okay, so you had that conversation in June. You were able to raise money over the summer, and then like get started right away. I always say, raising capital is really important, but it's not like the end all be all. And I wonder, like, when it comes to like you were able to raise capital really quickly and get started, you already had, I guess, market validation from conversations, but you didn't have market validation as far as product yet, right? Because your product wasn't in the market. How did you navigate having to, or rather, choosing where to spend your money based on the fact that, like, I'm assuming this was a pre-seed or a seed round. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
appreciate
Pre-seed,
appreciate.
yeah. How did you navigate like figuring out where to spend the money with also being, I don't want to say conservative, but 1.3 million, it's good money, but it's not enough money to, have like a really big team and then put money towards marketing, a lot of marketing experiments, really, right? So how did you navigate that with figuring out where to spend your money, because you have it so early, so it wasn't like you were able to know exactly what worked yet, and pump your money all the way into that.
Yeah, it's really tricky because, you're right, 1.3 million, it sounds fantastic, but that can get eaten up really quickly if you're not careful. So
Hmm.
we're a team of five, and that's pretty much all we spend our money on. Like there's not real like we share a very small office. Those first 6 months there wasn't really much marketing or travel because we were just building out the product and calling people, cold calls, cold emails. So didn't spend a lot of money. Now that we launched the product in January, it is about marketing and getting the word out and still trying to do that in a as cheap a way as possible. So when you look at sponsoring newsletters or going to events, like those are the things that, if you're going to sponsor an event and have a booth, that's tens of thousands of dollars. So we haven't done that yet, but sometimes you do have to try some things to see what works. We've had some luck with sponsoring newsletters, but yeah, those can be thousands of dollars too. So from my last business experience where I had my own, I had a couple of retail stores in the US. Like because it was my own money, it was just me, and retail is very cyclical. So in the summer, you think, oh, this is amazing. I've got so much money. This is easy. And then in the winter, you think, I'm going to go broke and my family's not going to be able to eat. It's very up and down. So I just got kind of religious about being very conservative about spending, about monitoring like the return on different marketing events and campaigns. So I think we're both very just mindful about what we spend our money on because we do want to make it last.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thought just because from the standpoint you had your another business before this, right? So it wasn't like this is your first time running a business. So you do have like some experience of okay, like stuff like legal fees and taxes and stuff like that that really do sometimes get time founders that they don't realize that also when you raise money it's very easy for all your expenses to go up, and next thing you know you have like an 80K burn a month and you're like, wait, how did I get there? Because when I first started we didn't even have 80K. So you already had that experience, which I do love. One of the things that I noticed that happens a lot in the entrepreneurship space is like you raise capital and you were very honest. You were like, most of that money is going towards the team, right? And like building the team that's necessary, which I think is so important. But oftentimes, and I think it's because investors like us to do this, we try to oversimplify what an input is and what that output will be like versus like, okay, I make $1 million. That $1 million is going to give me X amount of money that I can spend per month. I'll spend that amount of money per month and then I'll get back three times that. Like that's sometimes the math that like founders are tried to force to do or forced into doing when they're raising capital. And rarely does any company ever, it's not a simple math equation. And what I say is like, investors have to validate why they invested in you sometimes. So oftentimes they're trying to make math equations look good for their LPs. And then also when you're successful or 3 years later and you've like hit some milestones, you could look back and retroactively do the math and say, we did this, we spent this, and we were able to get this. But in business, it doesn't math like that, rarely. Maybe if you have like a consumer, like an online business that like is selling soap and you have to put X amount into like paid marketing and like and you're very lucky. But for the most part, like, business isn't like a science, really. It really is a lot of trial and error. So tell me a little bit more about, you started to get traction already. So you're doing things that are working. What are those things that maybe you're spending money on that are working, or even those things that like you're not spending money on, but you're spending time on and are working?
That's a great question. And you're right. There's, especially in startup world, like the numbers, you can put all kinds of frameworks around it, but it's going to change. You're going to pivot. It's a different customer. And I'll be honest, like we don't even have our pricing figured out at
Mm-hmm.
all yet. So like when you're doing forecasts, it almost doesn't matter because we still haven't
Yeah.
figured that out. So I think the first 6 months it was all about just like being mindful of the burn rate so that we didn't go over until we launched. Now, yeah, since we launched in January, it's more about figuring out the the easy, cheap things that get results, and
Mm-hmm.
hopefully there's lots of those. And then, where you have to spend money, you try it. So we've I didn't believe that cold emails would work. I was like, nobody responds to those. Those are gross. But we probably get, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 responses a month from cold emails, which I find amazing.
And before
Um,
you move on from that, because we actually, oops, all right, nearly knocked my mic over. I love that you mentioned cold emails because we actually grew our company a lot via cold emails starting back in like 2018, 2019, even 2017, right? And everyone says cold emails don't work, but there's a lot of things that like go into cold emails not working. You have to have it at mass, you have to have the right audience, like there's so many different things. And I do think it's easy for us as founders, and also just people in the tech space to be like, cold emails, hate them because we get them all the time. But depending on who your customer is, they might not get them all the time, right? So tell me a little bit more about like your cold email strategy. Like how many, or around how many are you sending out a month? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah.
Is it something that's really like super, super mass and, it just brings in a steady stream, or is it something that's like really more targeted?
I mean, it's definitely in the thousands because I think it is a numbers game
Yeah.
to a certain extent. But we try to be as narrow as possible with who's going to receive it. Because you don't want to, what is it, pray and spray and just reach
Yeah.
out to anybody. But so we try to be really targeted with the person, and we also try to match it with a trigger that we think is going to make the message have an
Hmm.
impact with them. So they'll be like, oh, I am thinking of that right now. So like if someone, say a VP of sales is currently looking for a new account manager and they're hiring. So it's like, I see you're hiring for this job. Do you know that this tool can help you do that? So that kind of matching where it's probably on their mind. Or we had one where it was new CROs at B2B tech companies in the last 6 months. So it's like, hey, you just started at this company, and then go with your message. So
Yeah.
yeah, so trying to be cleverish.
Yeah, I always think like whenever you're emailing somebody or whenever you're even like in a meeting, you always wonder like why am I here, right? So that's the same for when you get an email. You need the person to understand like why did they contact me? And if they feel like they have if you have a reason to contact them, they're more likely to respond versus just like a blanket email. Are you using any tools that are helping you actually identify those ideal customer profiles and identify who to email and how to email them?
Yeah, we use Clay and Apollo, and then we use Instantly to do
Yeah.
yeah, so the usual tools.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, those are really great tools. We use some of those as well too, and I feel like that's also the only way cold outreach works. Like, I find a lot of founders are sometimes paying people to create lists for them. I've seen that work sometimes, but like rarely does it ever work. And you're better off like investing in some tools and like things like Never Bounce we use to make sure that the person that we're emailing their address is actually the correct address, and it gives you kind of a score. And we find Never Bounce works. We love Clay as well too. But yeah, using tools like that really, really helps. So what you mentioned, I cut you off. You were giving a bunch of responses, but you mentioned cold emails. That's
yep.
something that you guys do. What's another thing that you guys do that helps with customer acquisition? Because at the end of the day, it's just about getting customers. Like I feel like
Yeah.
we overcomplicate it a lot when it comes to startups, but it's really just like get the customers. And you also talked about, those low hanging fruits. And I always like to say you have to have a mixture between those low hanging fruits and then those lead dominoes. That's like, okay, if I get that big client that they were, going places, and you have to have tons of those I'm going places clients in order to just land one. But yeah, what else do you guys do?
We've started to dabble in cold phone calls, like
Hmm.
cold calling people, which I really don't like doing, but apparently, we've talked to a number of founders and they say that it's like the number one way that they get people on the phone. So,
Hmm.
we've tried that. We haven't done enough yet to get have
Yeah,
any
that's
insight on
something
what
you
it
have to
works.
do. Yeah, a lot
But I
of,
feel like nobody answers the phone these days. So that one's a tricky one. Like I've made, say 200 calls and two people answer. So when you
yeah.
think about the time,
Hmm.
I don't know about that one. Um,
What about
Newsletters, we've
warm?
actually,
Oh, sorry, go on.
go ahead.
I was going to ask, what about warm intros? Because I think that's something, you know, we always want a warm intro. Have you found getting customers from them that or no?
Yes. Yeah. It's a couple of our investors have been great about introing us to different companies, and that was very helpful. We did get a couple of customers from that. Um, I do LinkedIn a lot, but I don't feel like that the is the right space for kind of the hard sell or the very obvious pitch. I feel like that's more kind of like I'll reach out to somebody who's definitely in our ICP.
Hmm.
I'll connect with them. I'll message with them. And if they're the right person, I might say like, "Hey, can I show you what I'm building and get your feedback?" Like I feel like that works, but I feel like if you try to make a hard sell in there, I think it comes off uh,
Yeah.
a bit icky.
Yeah, I could totally get that. I think that's also because the number of LinkedIn messages everyone gets, it's come kind of like something that's been kind of hard to sell people through. I find
Yeah.
honestly the best way is like, okay, if you think somebody is a good customer, like message them, not message them, add them on LinkedIn and like add a message. Hopefully you have like, some reason to connect with them, and then posting on LinkedIn, and then they see you, and
Yes.
then they see you often, and then they think they know you. They don't, but they think they know you. And then when you reach out to them, they're like, "Oh, like this is not a random person reaching out to me. I know her." So yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
find
like any of your content is like on point to what problems they're thinking of, and that's what you're posting about, then they're gonna be like, oh, this person understands what I'm going through. Let me go check out what they do. So then it's more organic and natural rather than like connect, try to sell them in a message.
yeah. So kind of switching gears here. You said you had a store in the US. Did I make that up?
Yeah, I did.
No, you did. You did. Okay,
I
so
did, yeah.
and now you live in Canada. How long have you lived in Canada?
So I grew up in Newfoundland and I left when I was
Okay.
20 and I moved back 5 years ago.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. So I often, because my company, we have like a US branch as well of it. And I'm Canadian, but I grew up in Bermuda, and then I went to school in the States and stuff like that. So I've had the experience of like really being able to ingrain myself in both like the US startup world, and then as well as the Canadian startup world as well too. And I would say they are very, very different. Like surprisingly different. They both have their pros and they both have their cons, right? But what do you think was like some of the difference and similarities between starting and growing a business in the U.S. And then also doing the same in Canada? I know they are very two different businesses, but I think like running a business is running a business no matter where you do it.
Yeah, I think they are almost too different to even compare
Compare.
ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like mine was it was part of more of a lifestyle business, right? Like I mean, I was running a couple of stores, but it was just me. I wasn't looking for any government support or any kind of funding or
Mm-hmm.
angel investors or anything. Whereas this is kind of the total opposite. Like we've done some accelerators, we're doing the different programs, we're looking for
Mm-hmm.
investors, we're thinking kind of in terms of growth of like, okay, what are the targets to get us to a Series A? Like it's so different.
It's
Whereas,
so different. You can't compare. Well, but
yeah,
like, is there anything from your first business that you were running in the US that you took and learned from the business that you're running now in Canada?
definitely. Like just the fact that if you are a founder and you are running a company, you have to do literally every single thing. And
Yeah.
I think having done that before and realizing that I love it made this decision a really easy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's
I love
probably
that because I think it is, I mean, maybe not anymore, but I would say like 3 years ago, being like a founder was really glamorous, the really glamorized really in the media. Now, so not so much because the economy is bad. So like people are not as excited to jump into starting their own business and forfeiting that, like that paycheck in the beginning, et cetera, and et cetera. But I think it was very easy for people not to recognize how hard you have to work as a founder and how you have to do everything. For me, I started the company 9 years ago and I was not initially looking for outside capital. So I was also like quite young, like I was like 20. So I was doing everything, and part of me was just doing everything because like, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm gonna do everything, just like from a sheer point of like ignorance and not even having like exposure to the idea of like this, like I don't have to do everything. And then I see like some of my count like my peers who have started businesses maybe like 3 years ago. And they might be like, oh, I could just hire for that. I could just hire for that. I could just hire for that. And sometimes it works and sometimes it hasn't, because I feel like, especially probably, I mean, you've probably had that mindset in the position that you're in because you raised capital very early. It's easy to try to outsource everything and like try to, be like, okay, we could just hire for that. But I think probably because you had your own business before, you had the mindset of like, guys, we gotta do as much as we can in-house before we start, hiring for those small things that might not be as important.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the biggest mistakes you could do as a founder is outsourcing the sales process at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like in those early calls and early months, like the magic is really hearing what people are saying, testing out different ways you're trying to sell, the way you're positioning your product, like all of that. If you outsource that in the beginning, I think you'd be doomed because that's
Yeah.
that's like the foundation of your company. So I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that's something you can't outsource. And then, like, even things like, filling out government grants or, you know, booking travel and sorting out events to sponsor, like all of that, some of it's very mindless stuff that you could outsource, but then you're like, it's only 5 hours a week or 10 hours a
Yeah.
week. Like it doesn't make sense. The hassle of going to hire somebody to train them to do it, you might as well just do it yourself. Yeah, in
Absolutely.
the early days.
In the early days. And I would even, I love that what you mentioned about sales team, because I definitely gone through that in the beginning. Like, we did all, like, I was doing all the sales, like we were doing all the sales in-house. And then, even 5 years in, we tried to do some outsourcing when it comes to a sales team, and it didn't work. And the amount of money that you spend to, get like that one qualified deal, like it doesn't make sense, right? So yeah, it's definitely hard to figure out, okay, when am I going to hire for this, or when I'm going to keep it in house. And it's not like, again, it's not science. It just has to be the right timing. I want to move on to you as an angel investor, because you have invested in companies. And so I'm sure you've had the experience of, meeting with a lot of founders, seeing what like has been successful, seeing what hasn't been successful. And then also now you started the company before, and now you've started this company in the tech space. What do you think is something, like, if you had to put on a billboard that like every founder could see, like what is the one piece of advice that you would give them that you have seen to be successful either in other founders' lives or something that has helped you?
I think in those early, early days when you're trying to fundraise, like so we were in an angel fund, so 25,000 to $75,000 checks, so pretty small. And we were only looking at women-led tech businesses. So again, pretty niche. Um, and what we saw was there was kind of a group that would ask for too little. So you're like, that's not going to help you. You are going to still run out of money in 4 to 6 months. So like you need to come up with a way to explain like that you need more money and how you're going to spend it. And then there'd be a few that, yeah, they would ask for too much, where you're like, you don't need that much yet. So finding like the
Mhm.
right amount to ask for is very tricky. Um, I think the other thing that's really hard for founders is to find the lead investor, because there's a whole lot of angel investors that are willing to come in for a small amount of money and but they don't want to be the lead because that's a lot of work. So that I think those were the two biggest hurdles I saw in the founders that I saw over the last few years. So I would say like if you can find a local group, especially in Canada, like each province has some good local either angel groups or VCs that will lead, and then that gets you over that hurdle. So that's kind of
Mhm.
if you can find a lead, then that's key. And then the other thing we did, we were just very honest. I don't know if it was because it was like our first time talking to investors, or that's our natural way, or we were just naive, but if we didn't know the answer, we'd be like, "Oh, we have no idea." Like we weren't making things up. We were just, this is who we are. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. And I think people appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think probably like you did mention that a lot of the people that you pitched in the beginning were people that you already had relationships with. So like that wasn't a big like, power imbalance. And I think that power imbalance is actually something that founders create, and there is no power imbalance. Like, I'm giving you a piece of my company, and I am going to work, and hopefully, God willing, you'll get a return. But when you think about like the amount of time you put into the startup and the risk, and like the money that you're not making that you could be making somewhere else, like, you are the one who's actually sacrificing a lot. And the person that's investing in you, most of the time they're investing somebody else's money, so there is a risk, but like it's not their own money. And
Yep.
even like when it comes from an angel investor, that angel investor typically has enough money to lose that money, because startups are not the best place to invest your money
Yeah.
if you don't have enough money, right? So we create this power imbalance, and it makes us, and sometimes it is created by the investor. Like, I'm not letting them off the hook either, but it makes us feel like, oh, like we can't be honest. We can't say, I don't know. We can't, like be like, okay, like I may not want to take your money. Like it is like an equal, you guys are on the same footing. And I think if people went into it a little bit more like you, in which of course you had that relationship with them, so it was a little bit easier at first, rather than being like, this is like my one chance, and that like they're the powerful one and I'm just here like trying to get pennies, which I think is like a mindset that unfortunately a lot of founders could have. You end up being less successful when you have that mindset.
Yeah, but it is really hard, especially if you're in a situation where you're about to run out of money
Yeah.
in a few months and your company's on the line. Like, you'd like to say, make sure you choose who you want as your
Mm-hmm.
investors, but a lot of the time you'd be like, it doesn't matter, I just want to keep this alive. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And then the other thing I would say is don't sign personal guarantees. That's
Yeah. No,
that's
that's
kind of,
insane.
although
Yeah.
it's funny. So when I was starting my retail store in Vermont, I went to the bank just to get a loan to buy all the inventory, and they asked me to sign a personal guarantee, and I was like, I don't own anything. Sure. Like, I don't have anything.
Yeah.
Whereas now I have a house and I have things, so I was like, ooh, can't sign a personal guarantee. It's too risky.
Yeah, and definitely in the startup space, and I would say like, probably, and you'll probably say this too. You're the business that you started before was like very different than this one, and like the risk is still there, but it's like it's a different type of risk, right? But yeah, I see so many founders like not reading over their contracts and not realizing what they're selling. I mean, and really just like, getting a lawyer, getting a good one, spend that money to get that lawyer so that they could tell you if this is something you should sign or not, and read it yourself. I want to talk about AI a bit. I know we touched on it in the beginning, but what is exciting you most about the industry? I like, we started building out AI tools for our company like 2 years ago, or maybe even 3 years ago now. And I remember the beginning, we spent a lot of money and like it didn't work. And then we're like, "Ugh, this sucks." It was like a whole drama. And I was like, okay, like I just have to put this on ice for a bit. It was probably one of the biggest like blessings that have ever happened, because we would have spent a lot more money building that product and we would have gotten to a good product, but the technology wasn't where it is now, where the money that we spent 3 years ago, it would have cost, if I was to build that same product now, it would cost maybe a tenth, maybe 5% of what I would have spent, right? But I've been following it for a while, and we build tools at Wiz Learning, and it's been so exciting. What excites you most about AI?
I think now, so yeah, just as background, we use a lot of different AI tools, and we switch back and forth depending on like what's the latest and greatest and what's the cheapest, and like,
Mm-hmm.
so we're always modifying based on what's new. And you're right, the costs are just coming down so much, which makes it very hard for us to figure out how much our product costs, which leads back to that pricing problem. But what am I most excited about? I love that, like, okay, I'll go on a super basic level of just the ability, like, that ChatGPT now knows everything about my company. It kind of knows everything about a lot of other parts of my life too. And so when I ask it a question, I don't have to explain a lot of things. Like, it is now knowing, which is kind of freaky, but I love it. Um, I think the best part is like for companies that have a lot of manual, tedious tasks that can easily be automated, like that's a game changer, not only for the efficiency of the company, but for like the happiness of the individuals who don't have to
Mhm.
do that mindless work anymore. And then they can focus on those more interesting strategic things that probably bring them more joy and the company more money. So I think that's going to be the big game changer. Um, and then just playing around with like the creating images is actually really cool. I find that amazing. On the flip side, I do worry because I came from anti-financial crime, like the scams with the deep fakes and video and voice. I do think that's going to be terrifying of what I
Yeah.
see.
I love that you brought that up because, it calls for the need to have more digital literacy and media literacy. And, there are so many like internet scams that people fall for that if they just had a little bit more literacy around what to trust and what not to trust, they wouldn't fall for them, right? So, yeah, that is definitely like the scary side, the side of AI. But I think for the most part, what you said about, making our lives more enjoyable, I remember it used to be so tedious to like get a lead list together. And it used to be like, like so hard. And I know like asking like former team members to do it and they just did not want to do it, right? Even though it was their job, they like it was just the worst thing for them. But now we have a lot of tools that make things that, were ultimately difficult a lot easier to do. And I think it also helps with analysis paralysis as a founder. You get an email, you're like, how do I answer this? You could put it into AI and it could tell you how to answer it, or at least get the ball rolling, and so like there's now not really an excuse to like not respond to that email or spending an hour trying to respond to a customer. It just moves things along a lot quicker, which I love. um before we go, because I know we're kind of running out of time here, I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests. And it's kind of taken from the question of if you were to have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be? But it's a bit different. So, if you were able to assemble a board of advisors for not just your company, but like your life, like you as a founder, they'll give you business advice, they'll give you just advice when it comes to anything in your life, and it's five people on the board. What would one of them be? And pick like we're more thinking like a known person, so like a celebrity or like a historical figure or somebody like that, or a
Ooh,
fictional figure. It could be fictional too. Yeah.
ooh, gosh. Okay, I wasn't ready for this one. Um, okay, hmm. Can I have multiple people? Or
You
you
can.
really
You
just
can have
want one?
multiple. You can. Well, your board of advisors for your life, Andrea's life, will have multiple people. But I was asking for one. But you could tell me two. You could tell me two.
Oh, only two. Okay. For my life. Okay, I'm gonna go with the first thing that popped into my head. Because I feel like this applies to, it's actually a business book, but I think
Mhm.
it's like an amazing life skill. And I don't know this person at all, but the person who wrote the book Radical Candor, have you read that
Hmm.
book?
No, I haven't.
So good, and I've used it in team trainings, I've used it in my personal life. It is, and it's very simple. It is so maybe this person wouldn't actually have very much to offer, but I feel like the whole concept of giving people honest feedback because you care about them and you want them to be successful. So I feel like if that is a good theme to live your life by, then that person would probably be a good person to have on the board.
I love that. Radical Candor. I'm gonna put that in the show notes because I'm sure it's a good book to read, and I want to read it. So, and you said you have another one. Who's the other person?
No, the other one. Well, it was going to be another business book, but then my third person, and my kids will laugh at this, as I would just pick The Rock because
Oh,
he's funny and I love him. So
yes. And
yeah.
he's been successful, and he's had a lot of career pivots and setbacks. So, that would be really interesting.
I mean, the guy has a line of hair products and he has no hair. So like,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
That's so
Yeah, so there
funny.
you go. Those would be
I
my
love
two.
that. I love that. Well, Andrea, thank you so much for joining me today. If any of our listeners want to get in contact with you, want to learn more about your company, how could they reach out to you?
So Ritelio.com is the website, and I'm Andrea at Ritelio.com.